مرحبا بكم جميعا في مكتبة الاسكندرية. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Library of Alexandria. It gives me very great pleasure to welcome our many distinguished guests. We are very honored to have with us President Constantinescu of Romania, President Pastrana of Colombia, President Maidani of Albania, President Tadic of Serbia, President Stoyanev of Bulgaria, and Prime Minister Wim Kok of the Netherlands, plus all our other distinguished guests who are here today and whom I will not name one by one, otherwise we wouldn't finish and get on to our proceedings. So welcome to all our guests. This event is dedicated to the great Azerbaijani poet Nizami Ganjavi, and the manifestation of this collaboration between the Nizami Ganjavi International Center in Azerbaijan, in Baku, Azerbaijan, and in Ganja, Azerbaijan as well, and the Library of Alexandria. And so we will have, this morning will be in English, and in the afternoon we will have scholarly papers presented by specialists on Farsi literature and on Nizami, who will speak in Arabic, and that will be webcasted to universities and students around Egypt. And so to start our proceedings, it is my great honor to invite to the podium Dr. Hani al-Misiri, the governor of Alexandria.
Good morning, and welcome to Alexandria. First of all, it's not easy to stand here before you and say the right words, considering the presence of such dignitaries as yourselves, Egyptians and international. It is an honor for me to be here. So, welcome to Alexandria, a true city of arts, culture, and civilization. A really true cosmopolitan city. Alexandria is lucky to have you and host you here, and certainly this event in particular. A first for us here in Alexandria, I'm told, as we are gathered here in honor of a poet who certainly loved life and defended the dignity of mankind and certainly women. Here we are in Alexandria, and hope we are soon in Baku, to avail Alexandria and its own poet, al-Busiri, who was also full of love, and his words too echoed around the world. What better can one hope for? The event of honoring love. A finer word being here in the Biblioteca Alexandrina. I translate and echo the words of the wise Dr. Ismail yesterday. An Egyptian foundation with international dimensions, in tune with contemporary mandates. Indeed it is, and soon to be much more from what we saw yesterday in the board. Once again, thank you and welcome to Alexandria.
And now I would like to ask Mrs. Gohar Bakshayeva, who is an Arabic scholar on the Institute of Oriental Studies of the Academy of Sciences of Azerbaijan, to honor us with a few opening remarks.
أيها السادة والسيدات الأعزاء، اسمحوا لي قبل كل شيء أن أبلغكم السلام وحسن التمنيات لرئيس جمهورية أذربيجان السيد المحترم إلهام علييف، والاحترام الصادق لشعب أذربيجان. اليوم حقيقة يوم مشهود هنا على أرض المقدسة لمصر، في الاسكندرية القديمة، في المكتبة المشهورة، يحقق افتتاح للتمثال النصف للشاعر العظيم الأذربيجاني نظامي كنجوي. وتتعلق الشعب المصري والشعب الأذربيجاني علاقات ثقافية قديما. قد دخل أذربيجان إلى الخلافة العربية في القرن السابع، وكان الشعب الأذربيجاني خلال عدة القرون في تركيبه والتراث العربي والإسلامي أثر على شعبنا تأثيرا قويا جدا، ولشعبنا بدوره ذخر في الحضارة الإسلامية. إن المؤلفات للشاعر العظيم نظامي كنجوي لا تتسع في حدود قومية واحدة. التراث الشعر للنظام تنتمي إلى البشرية كلها، وأعطى الشاعر بخمسه ذخرا قيما جدا في خزينة الفكرة الشعرية والنوقية والفلسفية العالمية، وأسس مرحلة جديدة على الإنسانية لعهد الكلاسيكية، وعين تطوير للشعر الشرقي كله إلى القرون المستقبل العديدة. في مؤلفات نظامي كنجوي توحد بصورة عبقرية التراث العقلي للإنسانية كلها الذي خلق قبله في الشرق أو في الغرب. اليوم نقرأ بحب جميع منظومات لنظامي كنجوي، وبما في ذلك منظومته ليلى ومجنون. نظامي نفسه كتب أنه قبل ابتدائها، يعني هذا منظومة، قرأ كلا ما كتبت عن ليلى ومجنون، وأشار مباشرة إلى كتاب الأغاني لأبي الفرج الإصفهاني. وفي منظومة آثار تعرف قريب للشاعر مع أصله العربي ومع الشعر الأزري العربي، يعني أخبار عن قصير لبنى، جميل بوسينة، أروى عفرة، قصير عزة وإلى آخر. أفكر أن موضوع المنابع العربية لنظامي كنجوي الذي أبحثه الآن لها أهمية كبيرة، وهذا الموضوع سوف يفتح لنا صفحات جديدة مهتمة في دراسة المسائل للعلاقات والتأصيل المشتركة للآداب الشرقية. وقد نشر كتاب عن العلاقة الأدبية العربية أذربيجانية في معهد الدراسة الشرقية للأكاديمية العلوم في أذربيجان. واسمحوا لي أن أعتبر شكرا جزيلا للدكتور والعالم المشهور السيد إسماعيل سراج الدين، ولكل من دخلوا عملهم في افتتاح التمثال النظامي كنجوي. وأشكر أيضا دكتور عبد النعيم محمد حسين، مدرس بكلية الآداب في جامعة إبراهيم، لتأليف كتاب نظامي كنجوي شاعر الفضيلة، عصره وبيئته وشعره، والدكتور إسماعيل سراج الدين لتقديم هذا الكتاب. وأشكر مرة أخرى وأتمنى لكم الصحة وكل النجاحات، وأتمنى للشعب المصري الازدهار والسلم والتقدم، وشكرا جزيلا لاستقبالكم وحسن الضيافة. شكرا.
لفتة جميلة من إخواننا في أذربيجان أن يقدموا الكلمة باللغة العربية. فالحقيقة تسقيف تاني أظن. Ladies and gentlemen, English is pretty much everybody's second language. So we shall now proceed in English, but I wanted to emphasize that there are earphones and simultaneous interpretation between English and Arabic for all our different visitors who feel they want it for the English-speaking presentations, or for those who want it for the Arabic-speaking presentations. It's available for both. Now it gives me great pleasure to call on a few of our very distinguished guests at this moment. And I will start with the President of Bulgaria, President Peter Stoyanov, good friend, and also a member of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center's board. So, Peter, President Stoyanov.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Your Excellencies, dear Presidents, dear colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me, first of all, to thank the organizers of this very prestigious event, the Library of Alexandria and Nizami Ganjavi International Center, for the wonderful idea to organize it. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this gathering. My special thanks to Dr. Ismail Sarageldin, because Biblioteca Alexandrina is not only just a library, but also a symbol of the knowledge that surpasses the centuries. And it is an honor for me to work with Dr. Sarageldin, the director of the library, but also co-chair of Nizami Ganjavi International Center, because his deep knowledge not only about Nizami Ganjavi helps all of us to work towards a better future. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege for me to be part of Nizami Ganjavi International Center, as Nizami's work is amongst one of the most significant literary legacies left to humanity. Nizami is not only a great poet, but also a great philosopher and humanist who received a lot of recognition during his time. Nizami Ganjavi was a poet of genius who was able to tell stories about society on a small scale, which can then be applied to humanity universally, and that is why his work can travel through the time. Due to the fact that Nizami advocated universal aspirations such as political reform, interethnic dialogue, and cooperation between people, he remains relevant and a source of inspiration to many, even in our digital age. Moreover, in today's world where bloody conflicts, violence, and clashes between different religions and culture is the norm, we really need Nizami Ganjavi and his philosophy, as it is a philosophy of understanding, mutual understanding, moderation, and cooperation between the different cultures. His philosophy defends the diversity of humanity, and he knew that only through this diversity and exchange between the different peoples, cultures, and religions can the world become a better place. This is why Nizami is not only a source of great pride to Azerbaijan, but also to the whole world. 8 centuries ago, he preached a philosophy that said no to hatred, and instead of that promoted an openness and understanding of all the culture of his time. His attitude towards women is also remarkable. Today, where in many parts of the world, violence against women is still widely practiced, Nizami Ganjavi can be a real example and inspiration. And finally, I am really proud that the aim of our center is to spread the creative works of Nizami Ganjavi, because his legacy unites nations and cultures. It promotes intercultural dialogue, learning and understanding, and stimulates the building of inclusive societies and the promoting of the values of peace, justice, and human rights. That is why, at the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, have a responsibility to spread these ideas and, above all, fight the obstacles that are in the way of transmitting Nizami's message of peace and understanding between different peoples and cultures in our more and more globalized world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now I will call on two other colleagues who are also former presidents, one by one. First, President Emil Constantinescu of Romania, with whom not only we work together on a number of things pertaining to the Nizami Center, but I must tell you I have a very special relationship with him. And I have received many honorary doctorates from all over the world, but the first honorary doctorate I received was from Romania. And he was the president of the university who signed that first honorary doctorate and opened my career in international recognition. So, former president of the university, great scholar, president of Romania, and colleague on the boards of the Library of Alexandria and the board of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, President Emil Constantinescu.
Thank you, Ismail Saradelgin, for your kindly words. Your Excellency, distinguished audience, I'm very happy to be here together and share the same ideas. First of all, I want to appreciate this extraordinary cooperation between Biblioteca Alexandrina and Nizami Ganjavi Center. Why? Because cultural heritage has always been a difficult and extremely sensitive topic for all those interested in preserving history and making the most of it. The main issue here is the most subjective essence of the heritage idea. Given the circumstances, the only way to actually solve dissension of the kind of is dialogue. A dialogue structure according to various aspects of reality, scientific, psychological, cultural, artistic, and last but not least, religious. This is the sense of the action of Biblioteca Alexandrina and Nizami Ganjavi Center. Dear friends, diversity in ways of living and regimes is a sign of human freedom, not a sign of error. And so, having different alternatives of achieving prosperity, then the choice should not be necessary, a tragic one. A great humanity conversation must now be encouraged as for larger and larger groups of regular people who develop a free flux of ideas and knowledge worldwide. Now, all people talk about and fight for peace. But for the moment, both the big powers, international organizations like United Nations, UNESCO, or civil society try to create a political culture of security through negotiation and cooperation. In order to promote peace and understanding throughout the world, we are looking for the lowest common denominator on which everybody can agree. What is different in this action or Biblioteca Alexandrina or Central Nizami Ganjavi? We should plan for more. If we want to make a real peace and understanding between people, we must focus to identify not the lowest common denominator, but we should relate ourselves to the highest common denominator. 20 years ago, people in Eastern Europe were ready to fight and to die for freedom and democracy. In a new millennium, let us rediscover faith, not in order to use it like it happened during the long history of humanity against each other, but to understand our reason on earth. Peace is a name of God. Either we are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or believers in Asian religions. Only man's arrogance made him forget the message of God, no matter how we call his name in our language or faith. Perhaps after the human face communism project had failed once and for all, it is the right time for the new democracies to create a human face society project. Thus, the new 21st century revolutions will be not only for liberty, but also for human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, President Constantinescu. Today we have the great privilege of welcoming in the midst of the Board of Trustees of the Library of Alexandria a new member, but who has a very special relationship to Egypt, I may say. I think all of you know, all the audience knows, that modern Egypt was largely created by Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, who took over after the chaos of the departing French expedition, brought order to Egypt, modernized Egypt, introduced modern agriculture, reformulated its administration, introduced printing, Matba'at Bulaq, introduced the official journal, did a lot of other things with such luminaries as Rifa'at Tahtawi. But Muhammad Ali came from Albania. So I'm very happy to invite to the podium President of Albania, President Recep Maidani. Please, in your second home, Egypt, come and say a few words. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, as I know, Muhammad Ali, when he came, he didn't know any word in Arab, but he has evaluated quite well the Arab spirit, and he became a real Arab leader. I've mentioned this one because years ago I read a book written by Farid Zakaria titled The Future of Freedom. And there he has mentioned many times that the spirit of Arab world is Egypt. And I have related this expression, and I think he is right. He is right because here, also in this Bibliotheca Alexandrina, we see the spirit which is present. It's a spirit of Arab world, but it's also the spirit of all intellectual treasure. For that, I estimate quite well the work done by Ismail. And in this sense, for me, it's also a great pleasure to say these words in this ceremony for a poet, a famous poet of 8 centuries before, which has written for tolerance, for understanding, for compromise, for humanity, and also for life, dignity, as it was mentioned, and the unity. And it's the right time to have this poet in not only like a sign, but like his spirit in the region and also in all the world. So for me, it's a pleasure to say these words. I have no chance to repeat some verses that I have read before in front of you, but important is that he was a person who loved the life, loved the dignity, but also it was for equality. Equality in all fields, including the gender equality, and for that we have to estimate this person who has worked on these characteristics, human characteristics, centuries and centuries before. Thank you again, and I appreciate this case to be present here and to put in my memories that I was in Bibliotheca Alexandria when this ceremony was organized. Thank you, Ismail.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we will now proceed to the opening of the scholarly part of this conference. And the first being a lecture in English, which I will deliver on behalf of both myself and our colleague Nassim Ahmad Shah, who was supposed to be with us and who is a scholar of Nizami living in Kashmir in India. But I thought that only Egyptian bureaucracy was that bad. It turns out that Indian bureaucracy is equally capable of delaying things. So the renewal of his passport did not arrive, return in time for him to get his visa and join us. So he and I have been in communication. And he has been attending with other scholars a recent symposium which was done in Geneva about Nizami and global ethics. So I will try to speak both to the poetry and to the ethics of Nizami. And I hope you will bear with me as we go through this. Let me start first with who is Nizami Ganjavi. Well, actually, his full name is Nizam ad-Din Abu Muhammad Ilyas ibn Yusuf ibn Zaki. He was born in 1141 in the town of Ganja, Azerbaijan, and by the time of his death in 1209, he would leave his stamp not just on Azerbaijani history, Farsi literature, and the global culture. He's known to everyone just as Nizami. He was not a court poet, which was unusual because poets in the Middle Ages lived by being around the kings or the sultans or the eminent people. He was a man of the people. Thus, he does not appear in the chronicles of the annals of the dynasties, even though his achievements should have put him there. But the compilers of these literary memoirs, known as the Tazkira, did acknowledge his immense contributions. But if court poets and chronicles would have him out of the records of the courts, he lived in the hearts of the people. And today, the world bears witness to his genius. An amazing poet, a distinguished philosopher, and a sage, Hakim, of immense erudition. Today, his biography appears in all the great books, and in one of them, I take this description of his interests. He is credited with a prodigious knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, astrology, alchemy, medicine, botany, Quranic exegesis, Islamic theory and law, Persian myths and legends, history, ethics, philosophy, esoteric thought, music, and the visual arts. I can't think of many things that have been left out of that list, and that is what qualifies as his expertise. So at any rate, we recognize his genius in many ways, and his work, especially the Khamsa, the 5 great epic poems, we feel that in addition to everything else, he not only had great knowledge of the great myths and works of literature in both Arabic and Farsi, in addition to a profound appreciation of local oral and written and popular traditions throughout the period of his time. It's an amazing achievement. He was a bridge builder through time and space. He helped connect the Persian cultural heritage from the pre-Islamic period into the Islamic traditions of the people. And although he emphasized the value of his own religious legacy, he was always praising moderation, never advocated a moment of extreme practice. Furthermore, his work transcended not only that Persian tradition, the Persian cultural heritage, it connected with the Arabic traditions, as was rightly pointed out by Madame Gohar. And he also opened up to all the Muslim and non-Muslim people of his time. And we find him influenced by Ferdowsi's enormous Shahnama, the Book of Kings, from which he drew to produce his own masterworks. But to put it in context, this is the same as saying that Shakespeare drew on Holinshead, the Chronicles of Holinshead, to write his historical plays about the great kings, Richard II, Richard III, Henry V, etc. Doesn't matter. What matters is the literary production that was done by the great Nizami, just as it's the literary production of Shakespeare that counts, not the fact that the original story appeared in Holinshead or that the original story appeared in Ferdowsi. So today, he is remembered very much as a poet. And we have lost some of his attention to detail in many of these other fields of science of his time. But as a poet, of course, his legacy is not only unimpeachable, it is unmatched. Nizami visited court only once in his life. He detested it and would never return even when he received an official invitation to go there. He was content to live a modest life. But not only was content to do that, he advocated it to everybody. A life of humility and moving away from the greed and the passion and the corruption of power. And he would say, in your village, upon your own private estate, don't think of eating from another's plate. Fortune will turn upon the unthinking fellow whose foot beyond his garments allow. Now, this is reminiscent, in fact, of much later work. Alexander Pope, who as a young man writes, happy the man whose wish and care a few paternal acres bound, content to breathe his native air in his own ground. But where Pope would say, thus let me live unseen, unknown, and unlamented, let me die, steal from the world and not a stone, tell where I lie, Nizami said, I shall live by the poetry I leave to people, and he was right. He lives by the poetry he left behind. He was conscious that his poetry would make him famous through the ages and was proud of his poetic achievements and struggled with plagiarists, critics, usually ignoring the critics, occasionally speaking out against them, but at the same time, he considered that pious and glorious men have long suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and have been obliged to endure enmities without deserving them. But he believed that patience and rising above responding to such critics was the right path, and he never returned the affronts and the harm. He even went as far as saying, as long as I have lived, never in violent way has the wing of a fly been bent, never mixed dregs in another's fresh water or sought to disturb another's condition, never. What a lesson for us all today. He even went further. Not only did he advocate not doing harm to one's enemies, he also said that the best way to use one's short time here on earth was to be good. Now, this may sound like a trite statement, but it isn't. Goodness to one's neighbors and friends is an essential feature of creating community, creating bonds of society. And he says, from dusk to dawn, for life to stay is hopeless. The only seed worth growing is the seed of goodness. And because the world will not stay for anyone, being kind to one's friends is best, and I stress. Now, he was open to all the cultures of his time. And he told all to be open to all the cultures of the world, that they would benefit enormously from such openness. And he says in the Kharat Nama that he researched in all the tongues and found pearls and gems of wisdom in everyone, and he collected and polished this with his poetry to integrate them into a whole. Listen to his own words. From every manuscript some worth came to me. I found and embellished it with jewels of poetry. I filled up my store from the more recent history, the Jewish, the Armenian, and also the Pahlavi. I took from every grain that which was excellent, and in from each pod the innermost kernel went. I joined the riches of one tongue to those of another, and the mass into a complete whole did I gather. I can think of few better statements about openness to the other and the importance of pluralism that we discuss in our world today. But besides these allusions to particular values and to other aspects, what do we have to say from Nizami's real legacy? Without question, it is his magnificent 5 epic poems known as the Khamsa. He enormously influential contribution to epic and lyrical poetry. The works are still read, studied, and admired, certainly in the East, and now in many parts of the West, thanks to the reintroduction, reissuing of some translations into English, but also because of the interest of some of the great poets of the West, like Goethe, and some of the more modern, well, poets, I guess, is appropriate since lyrics to music go together. Eric Clapton doing Layla, influenced by Layla and Majnun of Nizami, reaches a younger audience anyway than most of those who read translations of epic poems, although I like the translations of epic poems. But so what are these 5 great poems? Well, the first of these is the storehouse of the mysteries, Makhzan al-Asrar. And it was composed in the 1160s or 1170s, and it's the only one of the 5 that is not a narrative poem. It's not a narrative epic romance. It is a reflective, didactic, quasi-philosophical poem of some 2,250 rhyming couplets. It is divided into 20 chapters, each covering a discourse on a religious or ethical subject. And each chapter is signed by Nizami. Of particular interest for me and for many of us, especially those who have been living a recent revolution about good governance in our part of the world as well as in many other parts, is the second chapter, where, like all great teachers, he uses parables, stories, vignettes to pass on the wisdom. And there are 2 owls looking upon a dilapidated, deserted village, and they talk to each other, and one says, if the, shall we say, the current government, or in the verses of him, if the current sultan continues with his mismanagement, all the villages will soon look like this one. A reminder that good governance is an essential part for the prosperity of nations and for the openness to the other. And he defined his vision of good governance as a just ruler who listens to his people. An amazing vision for the 12th century, remarkable in every measure that you can do. This work that he did, the Makhzan al-Asrar, is also where we can see a little bit about the Sufi tradition of Nizami. He was a mystic, and he was influenced by other great mystics and influenced other great mystics as well. It is fair to say that the Makhzan al-Asrar was highly regarded and influenced many, including Amiri Khusru's Matla al-Anwar, the Dawn of Lights, Kermani's Rawdat al-Anwar, the Garden of Lights, and Jami'a's Tuhfat al-Ahrar, or the Gift of the Noble. So that was his first one, but he then moved into his real domain, which was the remaining 4 of the 5 jewels, the Khamsa. He is really, in his vocation, the greatest poet of romantic epics in the Muslim world. And it's also in these 4 other jewels that Nizami rightly earns his attribute of bridge builder. First, the next of these is a great romantic poem, Khusru and Shireen. It's a romantic narrative titled Khusru Shireen, which was written about 1177 to 1181, influenced by earlier pre-Islamic Persian tradition, notably the story of King Khusru's courtship to Princess Shireen and winning her, and in that he emphasizes the role of his rival Farhad. Now they all die at the conclusion, and there is no happy ending, but the story is told with great lyrical intensity. And the structure of the narrative is quite complex, using several genres simultaneously, verbal exchanges, letters, all imbued with poetic power. Now, it's not surprising that the mechanism that he uses, ill-fated lovers, are at the heart of that dramatic poem. I mean, this is the basic staple of many of the great works of literature, perhaps reaching a pinnacle with Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. But Khusru Shireen deserves to be listed as a true masterpiece in its own right. With hitherto unique artistic and structural unity, it would have a tremendous influence on later authors, and therefore is seen as a turning point not only for Nizami, but for much of Farsi literature. It also shows his ability to bridge pre-Islamic Farsi traditions with the subsequent Islamic heritage of his own time. Ferdowsi in the Shahnama told a story based on a true story, which was further romanticized by other poets such as Gorgani's Vizo Rahman, but Nizami made it his own. After that, nobody can say beyond that. Now, one of the most interesting things is the introduction of the character of Farhad, who is an ordinary person compared to a king like Khusru, but who loves Shireen. And for me, is really the real hero of it, and he dies. And he is totally moved, actually, to move mountains, change the flow of rivers, carve the rocks, create the caves and landscapes for her. And then he is told falsely that she has already died, and therefore he kills himself. You will find the echoes of that in Romeo and Juliet, right? But he says at that moment, he had been working every blow of his axe on the rocks to the rhythm of his soul, calling out to her, "Oh no, Shireen." So beyond, he looks at that work, and he's been told that Shireen has died, so he says, "Beyond the portals of death, my Shireen I will greet. And so with one leap, death I now hasten to meet. Far into the wide expanse his chisel axe he flung, and from that terrible precipice at once he sprung. And the rocks, the sculpted caves, the valleys green, sent back unheard his dying cry, 'Oh no, Shireen.'" Nizami could do all of that with the brilliant use of metaphor, rhythm, language, alliteration, all the tools and of a great craftsmanship in poetry, which is necessary to make it appear so simple later on when you hear it. But then he takes up that theme of the ill-crossed lovers again in the story of Layla and Majnun, or the Layla and the madman, Layla and the possessed. And that is a story from an Arabic tradition, not from a Farsi tradition. Indeed, it was written in 1192, and it's a story of Arabic origin, which he absorbed and embellished a little bit. It's a poem of about 4,600 rhyming couplets, masnavis as we refer to them, and it's less than half the length of the later Chronicles of Alexander, the Iskandar-Name, another of his 5 jewels. Now, it's a legend of ill-starred lovers. The poet Qais falls in love with his cousin Layla, but her father disapproves. They're prevented from marrying, and the distraught Qais roams the desert, obsessed with his love, lives with animals, writes poetry, and she resists her marriage to another, but Qais returns to her after she dies and cries at her tomb. And the obsession of Qais becomes so severe that he is given the sobriquet of the possessed or the madman. Now that story, along with other of al-Ghazal al-Adri, as we say in Arabic, and as was pointed out by Madame Gohar, including Gamil Busayna and including others, but that, the story of Majnun Layla, became, of course, the most important story for subsequent Arab poets. In Egypt here, our own greatest poet of the 20th century, Ahmad Shawqi, Amir al-Shu'ara, actually produced one of his poetry plays called Majnun Layla, retaking the same theme. And it has been kept as really the most amazing example of sublimated love that touches the divine. And as I said, you'll find it in Romeo and Juliet, you'll find it in many other stories. Now, in dealing with all of this, I have to point out a little parentheses. He wrote the entire 4,000 couplets in less than 4 months. And he says, he boasts, even boasts, that he could have finished it in 2 weeks had he not been too busy. And the question is, how can anyone, even at 4 months, that's 1,000 rhyming couplets per month, that's a lot, and how can someone produce such an amazing literary masterpiece in so short a time? Well, my friends, I have only one answer. That is how you differentiate genius from mere talent. He was a genius. And it was that genius, that ability, that is recognized by possibly the greatest genius in the West of his time, the great Goethe. And Goethe says about Nizami, that he had looked at Nizami and was very impressed with him, and he referred to him in these words. It's a citation from Goethe: a gentle, highly gifted spirit, who, when Ferdowsi had completed the collected heroic traditions, chose for the material of his poems the sweetest encounters of the deepest love. Majnun and Layla, Khosrow and Shireen, lovers he presented, meant for one another by premonition, destiny, nature, habit, inclination, passion, staunchly devoted to each other, but divided by mad ideas, stubbornness, chance, necessity, and force, and then miraculously reunited, and yet in the end again, in one way or another, torn apart and separated from each other. The reading of Goethe on Nizami's contributions could not be better stated than today, and as you see, it rejoins the great tradition of the tragedies of unrequited love that have been the basis of so much of Western and, dare I say, human literature in all the tongues of the world. But to me, personally, the greatest of his poems is the Haft Paikar, or the Seven Beauties. Now here he leaves, in the last 2 jewels, he leaves the themes of these lovers and moves on to a rather interesting tradition. It is about how to govern, how kings should be wise, and how impetuous, courageous, great princes can learn wisdom. And what's interesting is usually they end up learning it from women in his work. The Haft Paikar is an enormously complicated structure. You can read it in one go as a story of Bahram Gur, the great Sassanid prince, but fundamentally, it is a complicated series of stories within stories and vignettes within vignettes. It's like a huge mosaic, and if you step away from it, you can say, yes, that is the story of Bahram Gur. But structurally, there is a use of esoteric structures. The number of 7 reappears in different ways throughout. The unity of the number appears. And it is the journey of Bahram Gur from an impetuous young prince who leaves his affairs to his vizier to run the country, pursues hunting, enjoys himself, gets married, meets 7 princesses for whom he builds 7 domes, each of a different color. And in the process of all of that, with each princess, he learns a different story because the princess tells him a story, a bit like Shahrazad in the Arabian Nights. But each story imparts some wisdom. And then after the 7 princesses, he meets the victims of the oppression of the leader that he left in charge, and they have 7 complaints to give him. And in the end, he resumes his responsibilities as a wise ruler and a great ruler at the end. So if you step back, you can see the first pattern, and you look a little more and you see the patterns. It's not a linear pattern, it's sort of like it loops in and in and in. And then if you look at that great mosaic, you will find that the pieces of the mosaic are not even a single color. Within each piece of the mosaic, there is another vignette and another story. It is a magnificent piece of not only literary creation, but poetic manifestation that I doubt has been equaled anywhere. It deserves much greater attention. It has been recently retranslated into English by Julia Scott Maysami in the Oxford series. But what can we say? To translate poetry requires a poet. In Egypt here, we have Dr. Muhammad Irani, who did a magnificent translation of Shakespeare's Hamlet. And I asked him, when I saw him, I said, this is the greatest translation I've ever seen of Hamlet into Arabic. He himself is an Arabic poet, of course, and he said to me, it took him 12 years. 12 years. And he says, I just have the lines in my mind, and then I find it clicks. So I pull my car out the side of the road, and I start writing 3-4 lines, and I put them aside. Night I come back, same thing happens again. We know, for example, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam have become an enormous success because of the translation of Edward Fitzgerald, who was a poet, even though he wasn't absolutely faithful. So how do we deal with that? Well, for one thing, we accept the books as they are. For those of us who can master the Farsi and speak the language, they can enjoy it in the original language. Others of us simply have to rely on the availability of the translations in different languages. Now, in the Hafte Paikar, there's one story about women that deserves our attention, and so is another in the case of the Iskandar-Name. And that one is that in the early part of the story, Bahram Gur takes his favorite slave girl and goes to hunt, and he says, I'm so magnificent in everything I do, give me a challenge. And so she challenges him to pierce the ear and the hoof of one of the wild animals with a single arrow. And he throws a little bit of clay on the ear, and the animal tries to use his hind leg this way, and he pierces both with one arrow. And the coquettish Fitna, an interesting name, Fitna, says to him, well, so what? It just shows that you practiced a lot with your bow, and practice makes perfect. And he is so enraged that he sends her out to be killed. However, she is not killed, and she goes into the forest and stays there, and for 6 long years. And in the place where she lives, there's an inn or something, and it has 60 steps. And so she starts with a baby calf put on her shoulders, and she walks up with it. And every day she carries the calf, and the calf gets bigger, and the steps get longer. and she keeps carrying it up and down. And then 6 years later, the prince is again in the forest, and he hears stories, so he goes to the inn, and he watches this young woman really carry a calf up the steps. And he's amazed, and he calls to her, and he says, how can you do this? And she says to him, practice makes perfect. So he suddenly looks at her, he recognizes her, and they are reconciled. But the two parts of that I want to emphasize, here Nizami shows that the determination of a young woman can give her even the ability to compete with men, not just stand up to them with what she says, but to compete with men even in physical strength. And that's just one aspect of his attitude towards women, because in the story of the Haft Paikar, recall also the wise princesses, the 7 princesses, 7 wives of Bahram. Each one of them teaches him a lesson that makes him a wiser and wiser king until he returns to become a wise king. And in the Iskandar-Nama, which is the Chronicle of Alexander the Great, well, it's a Chronicle of Alexander the Great that is somewhat mixed up in terms of legend coming into play, because here Alexander is given a role not just as a conqueror, which we know from history, but there's also a mixing of a Quranic prophetic figure, Dhul Qarnayn, and adding some romances of his own. So originally he wanted to write 3 books, Alexander the Conqueror, Alexander the Seeker of Truth, and then Alexander the Prophet who talks about truth. He collapsed the second 2 into one book, so we have 2 books in the Iskandar-Nama. But the interesting thing in the Iskandar-Nama, one vignette that is very relevant, Alexander goes to see the Queen of Barada, and she recognizes him. He pretends to be a messenger, and she recognizes him. And her name was Queen Nushaba of Barda. And she teaches an important lesson to Alexander the Great. The queen, who had recognized Alexander, who had come disguised as a messenger, tells him that she knows who he is. And she then invites him to eat. And she offers him jewels and gold to eat. And he refuses. He says, I can't eat this. And she points out that yet men are killed for such treasure. And then she offers him bread. And she said, and that is what is produced by the men who are killed for that which you just rejected, the stones that you just rejected. And that, of course, triggers in Alexander a reflection on what is really valuable in life. And that lesson comes from a woman. So the princesses impart wisdom and knowledge to Bahram Gur. Queen Nushaba imparts wisdom to Alexander. Fitna shows that determination and courage can overcome everything. And thus, his depiction of women, yes, on one side we have the epic romantic poems where women are endowed with great beauty, elevated on a pedestal, and are objects of desire that inspire men literally to move mountains in the case of Farhad, in Qusra and Shireen. But the greatness of Nizami is that he does not limit himself to this typical idealized view of women, which was very prevalent in his times and found in much of the chivalry tales in both the East and the West. The chivalry tales had, the knight comes to save the damsel in distress, kills the dragon, saves the damsel. The damsel in distress is just sitting there looking very beautiful and unable to do anything for herself. Nizami's women are not like that at all. They are full-blooded creatures who have brains, who think more profoundly, who know how to handle the anger of the princes and the kings, who teach lessons, who show determination, who can stand up, even as a slave girl, Fitna stands up to Bahram and tells him, so what, you just practiced a lot? These are very different visions. This is the 12th century Muslim world in Azerbaijan. And let me say something else about Azerbaijan and women that many people in Egypt don't know, that it was in Azerbaijan, in Ganja, in 1918, the first Muslim country launched a republic, modern liberal republic, in which women had the right to vote. 1918. They got the right to vote in America in 1921. They got the right to vote in France in 1945. But in Azerbaijan in 1918, they got the right to vote. So it's not just Nizami in the 12th century, it's Azerbaijan in the 20th century. Regretfully, by 1921, the Soviet Union sort of ended that beautiful experiment. But I had the great honor of lecturing in the hall where that constitution was created in Azerbaijan. I also had the great honor of visiting in fact, it's the first thing I did when I came to Azerbaijan was to ask my friend Rovshan, our Secretary General of the Center, to take me to the mausoleum of Nizami, where in a magnificent mausoleum in honor of the great poet and in honor of that great tradition, at the forefront of all that's best in Eastern society. Now, one last thing about Nizami's vision, which I think deserves to be reflected on because of its relevance to our times and global ethics to this day. There's a part where he provides advice to his son. And what is important is he recognizes not just that everything that is legal is not necessarily just, and that people can play words with things that are not correct. So he says in the following way that he should learn to speak the truth no matter what, respecting the law and avoiding lies and trickeries. And Smith's rendition says, "Let the law instruct you in God's service, let it not teach you how to lie." And this I stress. Now, 400 years later, in Hamlet, Shakespeare would elegantly rephrase these very same thoughts in the lines that he gives to Polonius. "This, above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." So Nizami not only believed in these virtues, he was a profound humanist who believed in the innate goodness of people and their perfectibility. And he wrote much about the values that individuals should adopt. He was, in the words of MacDonald, a genuine social reformer. But what struck me is one more quality which we lack too much in our contemporary times, the great quality of humility. And he emphasizes really that the path to wisdom is humility. Now, this is fundamentally important. We in Egypt and here in the Library of Alexandria, we are confronting extremism with ideas, and the ideas of extremism start from a self-assurance that I am absolutely right and everybody else is wrong. And then after a while that everybody who is wrong is really an enemy. And since I'm right and what I want to do is right and these are enemies, then maybe we should get rid of them. And you justify all of that by that. But if, like the great Muslim scholars of the Middle Ages, we always added at the end the word Allahu A'lam, you would write about any topic. So-and-so said this about it, so-and-so said this about it, my own teacher said this, I believe the following, but then in the end, only God knows what is right. That element of self-doubt, that element of humility would prevent you from ever being able to say, kill this man, because I may still be wrong. So what does the Nizami say about the path to wisdom? Now remember, he was a Sufi, he was a mystic, and he discussed that in his poetry as well. And to those who want wisdom, he recommends that they should choose the profound and mystical path of spiritual enlightenment through Sufism. But he warned that it requires crushing one's own ego with humility to seek a higher truth. So here's his rendition in Nizami's Divan, Smith's rendition. I went to the wine house last night, but a way in I couldn't see. I called and called, but no one inside seemed to listen to me. And then finally the wine seller answers him saying, it's not the time when the doors open for anyone. Be more thoughtful. This is no mosque where the door is always open and where you can go and push people and go to the front deliberately. Here, every religious community in the world is here. Muslims, Hindus, Zoroastrians, Christians, Jews, one community. And listen, if you have anything to say, then first you should go and make yourself as dust under their feet. It's that easy. If you can rip upside your ego, it is that easy to listen to the other. Now these words, ladies and gentlemen, come from the 12th century. I find that they're very relevant in the 21st century, where we are witnessing in our part of the world societies being ripped apart and destroyed. Now, I just want to emphasize something else. It is clear that Nizami is not speaking of a literal tavern where wayfarers and locals go to imbibe wine and get drunk. He's speaking of the notion of wisdom which transcends mere religious practice. That's why it says it's no mosque whose door is always open. To reach that house of wisdom, you must take the mystical path. But that mystical path requires that you overcome your ego, your pride, and make yourself dust under their feet. And then, and only then, will you gain the insights that will allow you to move towards gaining wisdom. And in fact, Hafiz, the great poet, would also write a poem called The Book of the Wine Bringer. Again, he's not talking about wine. And I believe that contrary to the impressions in the West, Omar Khayyam in his Rubaiyat was also not talking about wine. They were Sufis who were talking about the elation, the sense of elation that you get, almost feeling like feeling drunk, but not with real wine, by the effort to commune with that greater thing that goes beyond religious practice towards a mystical understanding. That is the Sufiya, and there's a lot of spirituality in that. Now, in the end of all this, what can we say? Nizami's work is more than a paramount symbol of great literature. It is indeed part of the global heritage of humanity. It has, like all great legacies, reached universality through deep-rooted traditions interpreted with great art. It combines the storyteller's skill with the lyrical language of the poet. In addition, we all feel that beyond the art and craft of the wordsmith and the storyteller, there is the sincerity of Nizami. You feel that his sense of justice is not feigned. His spirituality is really reflecting genuine piety, not a showy religiosity. His deep concern for the human condition is not just for the characters in his epics, but for all peoples. And thus, I think that for us at the Library of Alexandria, with what we do and what we aspire to do, it is only natural that we should have something to honor the great Nizami. And we are happy not only to have our memorandum understanding with our friends of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, but we're also delighted that we will have a constant reminder, so all our visitors will come and see Nizami reflected in a beautiful statue, and they will ask, who is this? And we will be able to tell them, read, there's a plaque here underneath, continue in the library and read more, and you will find a lot more about who is this and why he deserves to be here next to the greats of Western literature, including Ibsen and Hans Christian Andersen, and Ukrainska, who's the great poetess of Ukraine, who's also here. So thank you for your patience, and I'm delighted to welcome all our guests from all over the world for this occasion, this happy occasion, where we celebrate Nizami in the Library of Alexandria. Thank you. And now, may I ask our honored guests, President Tadic, President Meidani, President Constantinescu, President Stoyanov, President Pastrana, Prime Minister Koch, to please come on the stage for this occasion of the unveiling of Nizami. And may I ask Rovshan Muradov to come on that side, please. Representative Secretary General of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center. But that is not all. And on this occasion, the Library of Alexandria has done something which we wanted to do for a while. There is a magnificent book about Nizami Ganjavi, referred to as the Poet of Virtue, by the late Dr. Abdel Naim Muhammad Hassanin. It's the most complete work that we have about Nizami, his times and his poetry. And I think it's very relevant that the late Professor Hassanin chose the title Nizami Ganjavi, the Poet of Virtue. So it was out of print for a long time. I'm happy that his daughter Shireen agreed to give us the rights to publish it. And I had the honor of writing an introduction. And I would like, in the presence of all our visitors, including these very eminent presidents and prime ministers here, to give the first copy of the book to be put in the library of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center. So thank you all, and we will be adjourning briefly at the end of this morning session. And for the journalists who are here, we will be moving to have a brief press conference. But I would just like to say, in ending this morning's session, Nizami lives. His values still inspire us and have stood the test of time. And when we think of global ethics, it's appropriate to reflect on the words of the sage of Ganja, the great poet Nizami. Thank you, one and all.
Yeah, yeah, your text, yeah.
Yeah, the speech.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he did it last night. So that's what surprised me, you know? Really? Yes. He was leaving dinner and then went to